Hey, everybody. I'm going to continue reading the autobiography by Michael Jackson called Moonwalk. Mom was happy for us, but she also knew her husband. She was more aware than we of the big ambitions and plans he had for us. He'd begun talking to her at night after we kids were asleep. He had dreams, and those dreams didn't stop with one guitar. Pretty soon we were dealing with equipment, not just gifts. Jermaine got a bass and an amp. There were shakers for Jackie. Our bedroom and living room began to look like a music store. Sometimes I'd hear Mom and Dad fight when the subject of money was brought up, because all those instruments and accessories meant having to go without a little something we needed each week. Dad was persuasive, though, and he didn't miss a trick. We even had microphones in the house. They seemed like a real luxury at the time, especially to a woman who was trying to stretch a very small budget. But I've come to realize that having those microphones in our house wasn't just an attempt to keep up with the Joneses or anyone else in amateur night competitions. They were there to help us prepare. I saw people at talent shows who probably sounded great at home clam up the moment they got in front of a microphone. Others started screaming their songs like they wanted to prove they didn't need the mics. They didn't have the advantage that we did, an advantage that only experience can give you. I think it probably made some people jealous because they could tell our expertise with the mics gave us an edge. If that was true, we made so many sacrifices in free time, schoolwork, and friends that no one had the right to be jealous. We were becoming very good, but we were working like people twice our age. While I was watching my older brothers, including Marling on the bongo drums, Dad got a couple of young guys named Johnny Jackson and Randy Ransiford to play trap drums and organ. Motown would later claim they were our cousins, but that was just an embellishment from the PR people who wanted to make us seem like one big happy family. We had become a real band. I was like a sponge watching everyone and trying to learn everything I could. I was totally absorbed when my brothers were rehearsing or playing at charity events or shopping centers. I was most fascinated when watching Jermaine because he was a singer at the time and he was a big brother to me. Marlon was too close to me in age for that. It was Jermaine who would walk me to kindergarten and whose clothes would be handed down to me. When he did something, I tried to imitate him. When I was successful at it, my brothers and dad would laugh. But when I began singing, they listened. I was singing in a baby voice when I then and just imitating sounds. I was so young, I didn't know what many of the words meant. But the more I sang, the better I got. I always knew how to dance. I would watch Marlon's moves because Jermaine had the big bass to carry, but also because I could keep up with Marlon, who was only a year older than me. Soon I was doing most of the singing at home and preparing to join my brothers in public. Through our rehearsals, we were all becoming aware of our particular strengths and weaknesses as members of the group, and the shift in responsibility was happening naturally. Our family's house in Gary was tiny, only 3 rooms really, but at that time it seemed much larger to me. When you're that young, the whole world seems so huge that a little room can seem 4 times its size. When we went back to Gary years later, we were all surprised at how tiny that house was. I had remembered it as being large, but you could take 5 steps from the front door and you'd be out the back. It was really no bigger than a garage. When we lived there, it seemed fine to us. You see things from a different perspective when you're young. Our school days in Gary are a blur for me. I vaguely remember being dropped off in front of my school on the first day of kindergarten, and I clearly remember hating it. I didn't want my mother to leave me, naturally, and I didn't want to be there. In time, I adjusted, as all kids do, and I grew to love my teachers, especially the women. They were always very sweet to us, and they just loved me. Those teachers were so wonderful. I'd be promoted from one grade to the next, and they'd all cry and hug me and tell me how much they hated to see me leave their classes. I was so crazy about my teachers that I'd steal my mother's jewelry and give it to them as presents. They'd be very touched, but eventually my mother found out about it and put an end to my generosity with her things. That urge I had had to give them something in return for all I was receiving was a measure of how much I loved them and that school. One day in the first grade, I participated in a program that was put on before the whole school. Every one of us in each class had to do something. So I went home and discussed it with my parents. We decided I should wear black pants and a white shirt and sing Climb Every Mountain from the Sound of Music. When I finished that song, the reaction in the auditorium overwhelmed me. That applause was thunderous and people were smiling. Some of them were standing. My teachers were crying and I just couldn't believe it. I made them all happy. It was such a great feeling. I felt a little confused too because I didn't think I had done anything special. I was just singing the way I had sang at home every night. When you're performing, you don't realize what you sound like or how you're becoming across. You just open your mouth and sing. Soon Dad was grooming us for talent contests. He was a great trainer and he spent a lot of money and time working with us. Talent is something that God gives to a person, but our Father taught us how to cultivate it. I think we also had a certain instinct for show business. We loved to perform and we put everything we had into it. He'd sit at home with us every day after school and rehearse us. We'd perform for him and he'd critique us. If you messed up, you got hit. Sometimes with a belt, sometimes with a switch. My father was real strict with us, real strict. Marlon was the one who got in trouble all the time. On the other hand, I'd get beaten for things that happened mostly outside of rehearsal. Dad would make me so mad and hurt that I'd try to get back at him and get beaten all the more. I'd take a shoe and throw it at him, or I'd just fight back swinging my fist. That's why I got it more than all my other brothers combined. I would fight back, and my father would kill me, just tear me up. Mother told me I'd fight back even when I was very little, but I don't remember that. I do remember running under tables to get away from him and making him angry. We had a turbulent relationship. Most of the time, however, we just rehearsed. We always rehearsed. Sometimes late at night, we'd have time to play games or play with our toys. There might be a game of hide and go seek or we'd jump rope, but that was about it. The majority of our time was spent working. I clearly remember running into the house with my brothers when my father came home, because we'd be in a big trouble if we weren't ready to start rehearsals on time. Through all this, my mother was completely supportive. She had been the one who first recognized our talent and she continued to help us realize our potential. It's hard to imagine that we would have gotten where we did without her love and good humor. She worried about the stress we were under and the long hours of rehearsal, but we wanted to be the best we could be and we really loved music. Music was important in Gary. We had our own radio stations and nightclubs, and there was no shortage of people who wanted to be on them. After Dad ran our Saturday afternoon rehearsals, he'd go see a local show or even drive all the way to Chicago to see someone perform. He was always watching for things that could help us down the road. He'd come home and tell us what he'd seen and who was doing what. He kept up on all the latest stuff, whether it was a local theater that ran contests we could enter or a cavalcade of stars show with great acts whose clothes or moves we might adapt. Sometimes I wouldn't see Dad until I got back from Kingdom Hall on Sundays. But as soon as I ran to the house, he'd be telling me what he'd seen the night before. He'd assured me I could dance on one leg like James Brown if I'd only try this step. There I'd be, fresh out of church and back in show business. We started collecting trophies with our act when I was 6. Our lineup was set. The group featured me at second from the left, facing the audience. Jermaine on the wing next to me and Jackie on my right. Tito and his guitar took stage right, with Marlon next to him. Jackie was getting tall and he towered over Marlon and me. We kept that set up for contest after contest, and it worked well. While other groups we'd meet would fight among themselves and quit, we were becoming more polished and experienced. The people in Gary who came regularly to see the talent shows got to know us, so we would try to top ourselves and surprise them. We didn't want them to begin to feel bored by our act. We knew change was always good, that it helped us grow, so we were never afraid of it. Winning an amateur night or talent show in a 10-minute, 2-song set took as much energy as a 90-minute concert. I'm convinced that because there is no room for mistakes, your concentration burns you up inside more on 1 or 2 songs than it does when you have the luxury of 12 or 15 in a set. These talent shows were our professional education. Sometimes we drove hundreds of miles to do 1 song or 2 and hope the crowd wouldn't be against us because we weren't local talent. We were competing against people of all ages and skills, from drill teams to comedians to other singers and dancers like us. We had to grab that audience and keep it. Nothing was left to chance, so clothes, shoes, hair, everything had to be the way Dad planned it. We really looked amazingly professional. After all this planning, if we performed the songs the way we rehearsed them, the awards would take care of themselves. This was true even when we were in the Wallace High part of town, where the neighborhood had its own performers and cheering sections, and we were challenging them right on their own backyards. Naturally, local performers always had their own very loyal fans, so whenever we went off our turf and onto someone else's, it was very hard. When the master of ceremonies held his hands over our heads for the applause meter, we wanted to make sure that the crowd knew he had given more than anyone else. As players, Jermaine, Tito, and the rest of us were under tremendous pressure. Our manager was the kind who reminded us that James Brown would fine his famous Flames if they missed a cue or bent a note during a performance. As lead singer, I felt I, more than the others, couldn't afford an off night. I can remember being on stage at night after being sick in bed all day. It was hard to concentrate at those times, yet I knew all the things my brothers and I had to do well that I could have performed the routines in my sleep. At times like that, I had to remind myself not to look in the crowd for someone I knew or at the MC, both of which can distract a young performer. We did songs that people knew from the radio or songs my father knew were already classics. If you messed up, you heard about it because the fans knew those songs and they knew how they were supposed to sound. If you were going to change an arrangement, it needed to sound better than the original. We won the citywide talent show when I was 8 with our version of the Temptations song, My Girl. The contest was held just a few blocks away at Roosevelt High. From Jermaine's opening bass notes and Tito's first guitar licks to all 5 of us singing the chorus, we had people on their feet for the whole song. Jermaine and I traded verses while Marlon and Jackie spun like tops. It was a wonderful feeling for all of us to pass that trophy, our biggest yet, back and forth between us. Eventually it was propped on the front seat like a baby, and we drove home with Dad telling us, when you do it like you did tonight, they can't not give it to you. We were now Gary City champions, and Chicago was our next target because it was the area that offered the steadiest work and the best word of mouth for miles and miles. We began to plan our strategy in earnest. My father's group played the Chicago sound of Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf, but he was open-minded enough to see that the more upbeat, slicker sounds that appealed to us kids had a lot to offer. We were lucky because some people his age weren't that hip. In fact, we knew musicians who thought the 60s sound was beneath their age, but not Dad. He recognized great singing when he heard it, even telling us that he saw the best doo-wop group from Gary, the Spaniels, when they were stars not that much older than we. When Smokey Robinson of the Miracles sang a song like Tracks of My Tears or Ooh Baby Baby, he'd be listening as hard as we were. So I'm going to stop there. I stopped on page 36. Once again, this was the book Moonwalk. These are the words of Michael Jackson from his autobiography. If you liked it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and message. I'll be back again with more. Peace.